So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here today. So we are going to be spending the next sort of half hour or so, and I hope all of you will be armed with questions at the end, on looking at this whole connection between health equals wealth. And we're going to be exploring the parallels and the lessons learned from the climate change experience as well in this discussion. So now. We can see, especially coming from the COVID experience, we know that health impacts on society and our prosperity as a nation. We know that. And I think there's a burning platform for change. And this is obviously what we're going to be looking at in terms of the system change that we need to drive a system around health and wellness and prevention. We have an unsustainable situation coming about with our health and care system. So what are the solutions going to be looking like? So this is obviously what we're going to be exploring. And I think as we've seen with climate, you can actually measure the health impacts on economic growth, on prosperity, just like you can with climate. So we're going to be looking at the role of the business and investor community to kind of shape and improve our health, but also reduce health disparities. And we're going to explore three aspects of this. Obviously, there's workforce health, and of course, we've just seen the previous sessions today, or have been looking at that. There's obviously the impact of businesses on via products and services, and then, of course, there's the wider community resilience and wider societal impacts. So that sort of framework is something that all of our panelists are going to be discussing today with our respective perspectives. And we also know that the business community has huge power, a disruptive power through their might. That we're going to explore, looking at the wider determinants of health, housing, nutrition, all these aspects that we know are actually far more responsible for good health and also bad health, depending on how you look at it, than anything that our health and care system can actually address. So there's a real need for change. We're going to look at this, what are the solutions, and we hope very much that you'll participate in the conversation. So a little word on myself. I mean, I'm driven by this need for system change in health, and so I wear a few hats, working very closely with John in particular on the Business for Health framework, looking at the three parameters to drive this change. And of course, my other panelists, they'll each be talking in turn about their perspectives. So we're really lucky to have John Godfrey, Dr. Kieran Boyle, Gavin Starks, and Jordan Cummings from the CBI, who we're working very closely with as well. So I'm just going to hand over to our panelists just to give their perspectives. We've got a whole range of questions that we'd like to ask in the conversation on this whole topic. So I'm going to hand over to John first, just to give a perspective on some of the work that L&G are doing and also Business for Health in this context.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tina. As you said, one of the great lessons of COVID was that health equals wealth, and this is true at a national level, at a community level, at a family level, and at an individual level. The health inequalities that drove out reinforced an existing trend, but we became very conscious that health was inextricably linked with the economy. And one of the lessons from the whole climate debate and the climate action is that you get real movement once an issue becomes mainstream and business engages with it. And business sees it as part of its risk and reward, and it's doing business day to day. And it struck us that the parallels between climate and health were enormous. I mean, at a very simple level, I work in a business. I have direct carbon emissions, and the health equivalent is, do my employees end up healthier or less healthy as a result of working for me? That's scope one. Scope two is, do my customers end up healthier or less healthy as a result of using my products and services? And then, does society more broadly end up healthier or less healthy as a result of what I do in my business? So these are key questions. And just like climate, the goal really for me as representing a large fund manager of £1.4 trillion under management, the goal is to try and mainstream thinking about health into the way we manage assets and invest in companies. And this is known more broadly as ESG investing, when you try and put an environmental, social, or governance lens on investment. I think it should be ESHG, and we should explicitly call out health as part of that process. Now, it's starting to happen. I would commend particularly the work of Share Action, who've highlighted issues with Tesco last year. They're highlighting issues with Unilever this year. For years, of course, we've highlighted issues and sometimes disinvested in some cases from the tobacco market, tobacco companies. So we have to do this. Why do we have to do it? Because it's good business to do so. It's the right thing to do, but it's also good business. Businesses create externality costs. It's true in climate, it's true in health. Somebody else, usually the taxpayer, has to pick up the cost of what businesses do to their customers and to broader society. And that means for governments it's very tempting to go after those businesses either through regulation, through taxation, and sometimes consumers will do it through litigation. Now, a good investor will work with investee companies to make sure that they avoid those situations. So is a company going to be hit by a sugar tax? How do you get them to adjust before that happens so it doesn't damage the value of your pensions and my investments, which will be the same thing probably? How do you aim off for investing into something which is so fundamentally wrong that because of its health impacts? If Purdue Pharmaceuticals in the US, which supplied opiates, had been a listed company, we might all have owned a bit of it in our pensions. It's now bankrupt and being sued for a colossal amount of money. We don't want that. And who wants to be the last investor in the health equivalent of a coal mine? Nobody. So that's why we have to intervene through ESHG investing to make sure we avoid these things. It's straightforward risk and reward, but it also gives us a warm feeling because we're doing the right thing for our fellow citizens and narrowing health inequalities and preventing damage to health. So this, I think, is a really key agenda. ESG investing, E is pretty clear what we do with climate. G is pretty clear on governance, it's usually binary, but S is very vague. And to avoid S-washing, social washing, I think we insert health in there specifically so that we have a measurable set of outputs for employees, for customers, and for the broadest possible impact of business. That's how we will generate real system change through Business for Health, through investors, through like-minded thinkers such as those on this panel. I'll stop there, Tina.
Thank you so much, John.
Along.
Thank you, John. I'm actually going to skip to Jordan because, of course, we're working with Jordan from the CBI, Head of Health at the CBI, and tell us how the CBI sees it.
Thanks, Tina. Delighted to be here, and the CBI thrilled to be doing more on this agenda. The first question I usually get is, why does the biggest business organisation in the country need to care about health? Lots of people, including my distinguished guests, are already doing loads in this space. Well, we do it because we think there's something in it for every single business in the country. Something rare happened during the pandemic. Trust in industry went up, and believe me, I've been doing this long enough to know that that doesn't happen lightly. And it did so because, for the first time, bosses up and down the country could draw a genuine line between the decisions they make every day and the health outcomes of their staff. It was front and centre of their world for 2 years, and it already created lots of systems changes that we're talking about within industry themselves. So we've got a kind of golden window, we think, at the CBI, post-pandemic, to take lots of businesses on a bit of a journey in terms of what their health offer might need to look like in the future so that they can retain lots of you good folk today who go to work for lots of businesses every single day. And what it might also need to do in terms of community impact. Businesses are huge anchor institutions within local areas, and so they can play a real role. And John's kind of scope 3 on community impact is something that we're also really excited by. And so when we were kind of drawing up a strategy for the government in terms of what we think the economy should look like in 10 years' time, health for us had to be right at the centre of it. So we want to build loads of bridges, we want to create skills hubs, and we want to import and export more as a country to drive up growth. All of that stuff definitely needs to happen. But we need to start thinking of health as an economic enabler rather than just a cost that happens to sit on the balance sheet. And so when I came into this job 6 months ago, the kind of good and the great of industry tasked us as an organisation with trying to set out a framework of where businesses could do more on a day-to-day basis so that it can add up to a kind of big mission aim in the same way that we've had on climate for the last few years. And I guess we're going to get into this later, but if we just think about where we were 5, 6, 7 years ago, climate was this big, intractable challenge. We knew we had to do something about it. It's an existential threat. But in reality, if you're government, you don't own every single lever needed to solve some of these seismic challenges. And so the partnership element of getting solutions to lots of these things is kind of at the core of everything we need to do on a day-to-day basis. And so for us at the CBI, working with Business for Health, the investor community, the academic community, gives us a real opportunity to do what we did during the pandemic, which was to get the right people around the table at the right time to kind of think more like a business. Problem, solution, move on. That's how industry works, and we can get to decisions much faster. Governments, there's a natural lag for lots of governments. Some of these decisions take more time. There's lots more actors. There's lots more departments to keep happy. And so we need to think a little bit more about problem, solution, move forward, and setting a framework, which I hope we'll talk about later. So for us, as a business organisation, it's really about maximising this golden window where more and more businesses are thinking about what they can do and helping people along that journey in terms of how they might do it. And a big part of that is a workforce health index, which I'm going to bend your ears about later on for a long time. But that's all from me, Tina.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jordan. So I'm going to turn actually to Kieran now. And I think this conference is all themed around how to get the next 10 years right. And I think what we're seeing now is the long-term view is really needed. Patient capital, into strategic long-term investments in health. No one will know more about this than Kieran, who's been very active in this space. So over to you, Kieran.
Thank you, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Now, you may have heard of the CBI before. You might not have heard of Guy's and St Thomas's Foundation. That's where I'm from. We're one of the country's oldest charitable foundations. We can take a long-term view because we've been around for 500 years. So hope to be around for 500 more. And our philanthropic arm is called Impact on Urban Health. And what we do there is we test real-world solutions to how you make cities healthier places for everyone. And I'm going to come back to some of those real-world solutions in a bit, because there's such an exciting role for innovative businesses in creating the conditions for us all to be healthier. But I just want to touch very quickly on how this is just very deeply personal to each of us. Because if you stop anybody and say, what matters to you in life, you'll talk about your health, you'll talk about your family's health. Why do any of us go to work? We go to work to look after those people that we care for. And that's really what we're talking about here today, is how do we increase people's health? And I also want to touch upon health inequalities as well. So let's continue the story of COVID. So COVID, when it first happened, this awful pandemic, was tagged as a great equalizer. And of course we know it's anything but that. In fact, the disease targeted those people who lived in environments with poor quality air. It targeted those people who lived in areas with poor quality eating options. It targeted people who had to travel to work on public transport, had little say over their living conditions, had little say over what their housing was like. So it was anything but equal. And as we think about the health inequality angle, what's often not remarked, but I think John expressed it so clearly, is that businesses have a major role to play in all of those things. So as we think about the fact that life expectancy in the UK is starting to stall, in certain parts of the UK, life expectancy, it's an astonishing thing to say, is going backwards for the first time in any of our lives. Businesses have a key role to play in tackling that, and perhaps I can touch upon some of the very practical examples of how investors or businesses are really getting engaged in this agenda in a bit.
Fantastic, that's excellent. Thank you so much, Kieran. So last but certainly not least, Gavin Starks, and I've had the pleasure of working with Gavin on the Open Life Data Framework, which I'm sure we'll touch upon. But given your experience as former CEO of the ODI, the Open Data Institute, all the work you're doing and have done with open banking, open energy now, what are some of the parallels that we can draw and the role of data in this whole discussion? Because this is an AI and tech festival.
Certainly. Well, I think it's really inspiring to hear my fellow panelists here talk about the positives of business impact. And I think really to be commended, we've come a huge distance in a short period of time. And we need to take lessons learned from the climate journey that we've been on now for decades and are still struggling to create impact at scale. And I think there's lots of lessons learned. You gave an analogy of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, which is used in carbon accounting. And when you get into scope 3, it's a mess. It's a complete mess because the data's all over the place. And you'll have heard a lot in the news recently about greenwashing and the concerns around environmental reporting, and are we confident that our investments and our pensions are going towards things that are actually going to deliver net zero, not just lower carbon. I think we're on the journey to lower carbon for sure, but are we going to deliver net zero? Because it's quite important. The parallels then to build on, I think, when we come to look at health, is the ambitions stated here are fantastic. But we need to be very clear about getting the incentives right. And those incentives need to involve business-led work, government-led work, and citizen-level engagement. And I think there's a role for everyone here to call up your pension provider or your bank and say, what are your targets around the things that you care about, whether that's climate, whether that's health, or anti-modern slavery, and so on. What are your targets? Secondly, how are you going to measure them? And thirdly, how is your chief executive's pay linked to the performance of those targets? Because the incentives here have to go right the way through the organization. We can't just wait for policy, because that can take too long, and certainly in the case of climate, it is taking too long. The perspectives we can bring to bear, though, I think, around what helps to drive innovation in this space, and looking to the data there as the kind of raw material that you want to feed into the AI solutions, or whatever the machine learning or algorithmic solutions more generally that people are developing, is we need to have better access to information. We need to have better access to relevant information that helps people make decisions. Now, quite often, the most useful information can't be open and shouldn't be open. It should be private, it should be secure, and it should be under the control of the person who it refers to. And we can learn from the open banking standard, which I helped to co-chair, and how that has enabled everyone in this room to share your personal financial details with third-party applications to help with your accountancy. I did my personal tax return this year with 3 clicks. It was a declared success at that point for open banking, having saved myself hours of anxiety and stress, because I know behind that there is a regulated framework that protects me as an individual. It takes the principles of GDPR and turns them into reality. There are modes of redress in there. Really, if you like, the boring plumbing underneath all of these things has to be, how do we protect individuals? How do we protect businesses from each other as well? Because they're just as at risk from bad actors. So there needs to be a clear sense of liability and a clear sense of consent management within data sharing to unlock all of the innovation that everybody at this event is trying to get to. And the good news is we've got a blueprint for that. And I think equally the good news is it looks like the direction of travel for our national data strategy around smart data is also aligned with those kinds of principles. So the activity, the call to action is, can we get businesses now to lean in to those kind of principles quickly and start demonstrating how best practice can work in this space, and lead by positive example rather than us picking up the pieces of maybe less than positive examples.
So Gavin, you talk about incentives, and I would argue that actually what we've got is a very perverse incentives at the moment, which aren't fit for purpose in terms of generating health and wealth in this country. So that's something that we really need to address. So just on this point of incentives, because I think what has been, probably the most helpful way to drive a lot of the change so far with the work that I've been doing with the panel is, taking a mission-based approach, because then you can start to break down the silos, the barriers, and it's not about private versus public. It's not about, it's about focusing on really what matters. So would anyone like to take that on? Like, how should we see, how do we deal with incentives? What are the business incentives? What are the investor incentives to really change? And how do we need to see that? Would anyone like to comment on that?
Well, I can start us off, Tina.
Sure.
From the point of view of a business, one incentive is a very straightforward one. And that is that you don't want to have more of your employees off sick at any time than normal or than your competitors do. So it isn't in your interests to have a healthy workforce. And it's not just about sickness absence, it's about mental health as well. When your employees are in the office, you don't want presenteeism, you want them to be engaged and feeling good about their work and enjoying a high level of well-being. So that is good for the business if people are doing that. I mean, then if you think about from an investor perspective, I'll give you one example. I mean, we're currently trying to engage with McDonald's, where we're a shareholder, on the subject of antimicrobial resistance. Now, most scientists will tell you that if you have a lot of antibiotics in the food chain as a result of modern farming practices, we end up ingesting those antibiotics. And then when another pandemic comes along, antibiotics will be less effective. I'm not a scientist, but a business which had a part in making that happen is not going to come through that looking good or performing well. So that's my point about you don't want to be the last owner of the health equivalent of a coal mine. So this is about aligning economics and health. And if you can get people to work with enlightened self-interest, you start to get really good results. And a little bit of pressure sometimes applied by owners.
Fantastic, John. Kieran?
Yeah, perhaps I'll pick up on that, because I think there's also, how do you unlock the personal incentives of people working within business? Because everybody wants to do the right thing, more or less. It's just like, how do you do it? So I chair an investor coalition that people on the panel and in the audience are involved with, called LIFE, Long-Term Investors in People's Health. Spelling's a bit dodgy, but and it's got many trillions of assets, pounds of assets behind it. And we engage with Tesco's. We engage with Tesco's for supermarket around how to help them sell a greater share of healthy food versus unhealthy food. Now, the Tesco's team wanted to do this. Their customers are increasingly saying they want help to eat healthily, but they weren't getting the support needed from investors to really drive at this. And so it's really helpful for the management team to hear investors saying, look, we want to help you, we want to help you here. But let's go back to the health inequalities point. It's really critical. Independent of how wealthy we are, as a country, we spend about 90% of our food budget in supermarkets. So when Tesco starts to make changes about the healthiness of the products it sells, and we know that unhealthy food tends to be cheaper, and if you're tight on time or money, that might be the only thing you can afford, then you start to see real effect at a great level. And people get excited by that, and rightly so, because it's an important thing. So I think there's a large part of how investors can support people within businesses who want to do the right thing to do the right thing.
And we've seen, and certainly in a conference like this, there are incredible innovations on the behavioral change and the nudging side that are coming into health. And we're seeing that through some of the examples and the case studies that we've been sourcing for the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities white paper. And role of retail supermarkets as anchor institutions, potentially, all those sorts of things are really, really fascinating. And the Smash app that I found out about recently, which gives discounts, to young people for choosing healthier food options in the shops that they go to, including supermarkets. So really fascinating stuff happening all over the place. But Jordan, I'm going to turn to you. You wanted to, on the business of incentives, the business case as well, because that, of course, we have to get right, for the business world to really get behind this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, not to depress the panel, but this is going to be really hard. Let's be honest about this. The majority of businesses in the UK are SMEs, and they're organisations where the chief exec also happens to be the HR director and the sales director and someone on the shop floor. So we're under no illusions. It's easy to sit in beautiful buildings like this and think a framework will help every business. But we've seen through climate, getting the tail of businesses in the economy to come with you if you're at the top end is really, really tough. So in terms of incentivisation, there's got to be a kicker in there somewhere for business leaders who honestly don't have time for this. And that brings me back to the kind of partnership point at the start. Businesses themselves have lots of levers, but there are some specific things that government can do to make this more appealing. You can use the tax system for a multitude of things, and they already do for small business. So there's a long track record of kind of playing with the tax system as best to help SMEs. There's some real kind of clear things we can do at the bottom end to incentivise investment, reforming existing policies, looking at the budget coming up where we can go a bit further, capital allowances where they're skewed towards health. There's lots of things we can do. But in terms of kind of building fear of missing out, the kind of FOMO to get businesses thinking, all right, I've only got this £500,000, I'll put it in health rather than put it in sustainability. Not that we should be advocating for choosing either or.
50-50.
50-50.
Both hands. Both hands.
But if you're going to build the kind of fear of missing out, one thing we saw from COP26 last year is that you kind of need a galvanizing moment. You need a moment in the year where the great and the good come together and say, do you know what? This is actually a good thing for the planet, it's a good thing for your business, and it's a good thing for us as individuals. And by the way, we really want to help you do it, but we're going to have to kind of push you forward on this agenda. And I think we're just missing that with health. And we've spoken a lot about kind of healthy life expectancy. If you're in government, you have to shoot for healthy life expectancy because that's your job as the state, to keep everyone as healthy as is humanly possible. But if you're in business, the levers that you can pull are kind of limited to that 40 years in the middle. And in that 40 years, you can play more of a role in all of our health, sometimes than the state can. So one thing we've been thinking about is whether or not there is a kind of healthy working years equivalent of the net zero campaign. How can we kind of shoot for that big target and get everyone behind it? So I think there's kind of a mix of pulling small levers down here in the tax system to really help SMEs on a day-to-day basis. But also you need that kind of big galvanizing moment to get everyone around the table.
Absolutely. And I think, going back to the sort of the mission, the big idea sort of approach, of course, we've got, the government has been talking a lot about the levelling up agenda, and there are 2 missions in there that do specifically relate to healthy life expectancy or an increase in healthy life expectancy, but also the minimising health and well-being disparities. So that has been something that we've been very, very focused on, obviously, in a lot of the work that we're doing. And that's, but I'm just going to address, and I know our time is going to come up so quickly over, and I do want to leave room for questions and answer questions from the audience. But for the cynics among us, because that people will probably question, business, are they really serious about helping, people or helping address health inequalities? There's a whole kind of them and us attitude that certainly I've seen, but has started to change actually between, for example, public sector, private sector. There has been some criticisms of, for example, in the climate space, greenwashing. This is helping businesses, it's not actually helping the climate. How do we avoid that? And how can data, which supposedly doesn't lie, but of course can, so what is the experience, from your point of view, Gavin, about how we can avoid the greenwashing criticisms?
I think the word I'd maybe use there is transparency. And one of the things that we've learned over the last decades, 30 years of the web, is that if you create a mechanism to share information and provide transparency at scale, more people can engage in asking questions. And actually we want more questions. We want more scrutiny around what people are doing. So there's a link of holding people to account, as some organizations have already been mentioned, where they'll actively go and scrutinize other practices. But I think here there is a public good component to it, which has a business benefit, which is what we've seen again in the financial sector, is by creating a common framework which enables data to flow. We've not only made a citizen impact, consumer impact, we've helped to stimulate new unicorns in the financial sector. There are more than 700 or 800 fintech companies who are not regulated, who are part of the open banking ecosystem. And I think there's the level of degree of transparency, control, and legal basis around which the data is enabled to be accessed and used is part of the solution here. It's definitely not a silver bullet, but I think it's the combination of quite radical transparency. It's not, businesses don't like it at the beginning and they love it at the end. It's one of these transformation processes where you go from a not very interoperable and open organization to a fully interoperable and connectable organization. And that actually increases revenue, and it increases transparency, and it brings a lot of good to your investors, to your customers, and right the way through the chain, including to your staff. So I think there's a lot of benefits from that. However, again, learning from COP, it needs the incentives. It has to have the political will. It has to have very strong leadership within the organizations. It needs organizations to step forward together, sometimes competing organizations. And investors definitely have a massive role to play in creating those incentives. And I think they have probably more of a role to play in mandating some of the things they want to see. And when it comes to pension funds, you're the shareholders. We all are all the shareholders. So I think it really is about everybody engaging in this. And just one thing I've heard on the climate circuit is you go in at the grassroots of an organisation, everyone wants to do something about climate. They say, yeah, but it's up to my manager. And you keep having that conversation up to the chief exec, and they say, well, it's up to the board. The board say it's up to the shareholders. The shareholders say, well, it's up to the pension fund, and the pension fund says it's up to the citizens. So we just keep going around in this loop. So the solution to that is it actually has to be everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask one more question and ask the panel to respond, and then I will turn to the audience. But this whole issue of a lot of the work that you did, Gavin, was triggered by regulatory reform. In open banking, triggered by PDS2 regulation, opened up a whole innovation ecosystem for fintech. So that was driven by regulation. And we know also the pension, the ability for pensions to invest in higher risk innovation areas, that was triggered. We know that the government, and this is, I guess, a call to government, with the interest now, with regulatory reform, we know that the data regulation is about to change potentially, et cetera, et cetera. What is the role of regulation to really open up opportunities to do something really bold, really radical, that would really change the dial? So just an open question for everyone to perhaps comment on before I ask the audience. Bold, big ideas.
Well, just to follow on that, we are in a position now in the UK, for better or worse, depending on your opinions on Brexit, where we can be more innovative with policy and regulation. So there is a huge opportunity, I think, for us to use the tools at our disposal to create new incentives, to enable new frameworks to come to market very quickly, but not losing sight of why they were there in the first place. So it's not just about kind of getting rid of red tape. I hate that phrase, because the red tape's there for lots of very good reasons in most cases. It's taking the frameworks that work, that have been proven to work, and saying, how can we get them to market quickly, and how does that unlock innovation in the economy?
Kieran, John, Jordan? Kieran?
Yeah, I mean, good regulation is just an aid to innovation, isn't it? And when we speak to business owners, both big business owners and little business owners, essentially they say, look, we just want regulation to level the playing field to help us do the right thing, not be at a competitive disadvantage if we're trying to, for example, sell healthier food. The thing is that government and businesses have exactly the shared interest in here, because we, to the point John said about the negative externalities of products that are sold. So I think we really need to laser in on regulation, helping innovation and drive population health.
John?
Well, this is a pension regulation point, really. It's always painful, isn't it, as UK folk, to have to admit that the French are better at something than we are. But the situation in France is that pension funds are obliged by regulation to invest 20% of their assets into things which deliver a social benefit. And we don't have that here. We should have something, I'm not saying it should be 20%, but there should be some kind of push through regulation to make investments socially as well as economically useful, or some part of them. And that is a place where health could be very explicit as a category.
So, Jordan, do we need a different GDP? Do we need something different as the measure of success in our country?
So, I mean, lots of people would say GDP is probably quite outdated as a singular measure to be shooting for. My chief economist will shout at me if I say that on this stage, so that's not the official CBI view, but we definitely should be looking at it.
You're right.
I think that, regulation in the UK is tough to get it right. It's really hard across different sectors, whether it's broadcasting or digital or health. But one thing I would say is what we've seen across different parts of the economy actually in recent years is a real move away from regulators just feeling like they only have a stick and no carrot. They're just people there to shout at you when you do things wrong. Actually, that's not the case. And when you speak to regulators themselves, they're incredibly enthused about regulating for improvement and innovation as well as compliance. And so we do have an opportunity. And I think the UK, lots of regulation is relatively archaic, but we do have a genuine opportunity now to look at it. If you speak to most businesses, I think you're right, Kieran. I think they just want a framework within which they can be flexible. They don't want everything done for them, but they want a kind of a safe space to play in. If you go out of it, we're going to shout at you, fair enough. But within that, please find a way to be better. And if we can get to that space where regulators are looking at improvement and innovation as well as compliance, we're probably on the right journey. But it's tough in the UK, I will admit that.
So maybe we need to get our heads together and put a proposal together for George Freeman, who's leading the regulatory
Sounds good
task
to me.
force. But anyway, so I'm going to turn to the audience for some questions, and I can see a few hands. I will go to you first.
Thanks. I'm Sophie Taysom. So I work with companies across the built environment to develop their approach to ESG. Just a comment on the incentives. I think we can learn a huge amount from that sector because the primary incentive is within a couple of years' time, unless you've got yourself sorted on that front, you're not going to be able to get finance. Simple as. In addition, we're already seeing with planning refusals from local authorities or areas like City of London that actually real positive change is required, or you just, you can't build buildings. It would be great to hear a little bit more about sort of next steps for the projects, and I'd be particularly interested in both how you're potentially linking to forthcoming regs around the sustainability disclosure regulations, albeit it looks like there are some delays on that, and also how important you think things like the PPN 0620 and 0621 are. So that's public procurement notes as they relate to social value as well as carbon.
So there's quite a lot of questions in that,
Yeah.
Sophie.
Apologies.
And it's Sophie, isn't it? So I'm going to, Kieran, would you like to comment? I know you've been so involved on the housing agenda, and I'll also come to John, because I know there's some about next steps too.
Couldn't agree more, would be my comment. What I would add to that are, what are the builds that, no pun intended, what are the builds that we can put on existing best practice? So, for example, there's really increasingly helpful regulations and best practice around how to build buildings in a way that are good for the planet, good for communities, good for individuals. At the moment, they're actually quite quiet on quality of air, particulate matter. That's a huge health issue, but you can actually use pretty much the same frameworks that you think about climate for how you think about air quality as well. So what are the kind of the builds that, for those of us who are focused on health, can make to the existing guidance that kind of also promote a shared agenda of how climate and health interweave?
John, I know you've been doing some amazing work, LNG, and next steps also in terms of
Next
business
steps.
for health.
No, I would agree with pretty much all your points, Sophie, and that's why we're working with Michael Marmot, the sort of health inequalities guru, to try and make regeneration of cities and new housing not only better economically, but also better for the health of a community. I would specifically pull out your point about procurement. We have social value in procurement in legislation, but to my way of thinking, it isn't applied enough. It is still a sort of pimple on the surface of stuff that usually happens on the basis of price. But the built environment's massively important. If you grow up as a child in substandard housing, your chances of having poor health in later life are massively higher than they would be otherwise.
So, thank you, John. So I'm going to ask, oh gosh, there's so many questions. I'll go to Angela.
Hi there, thanks Tina. It's Angela Middleton, and I work with connecting an individual's health with their productivity and their career prospects, so very much bringing it together. I'd really love to know the panel's view on stimulating workforce demand for this, because yes, we can leverage things with regard to incentives for business and government, but bizarrely, there's often individuals have a resistance to becoming healthier. And so you could be in that situation where you have all these incentives with companies, but their workforce actually are not interested in becoming healthier at work. So but conversely, we could really do some great work on stimulating workforce demand. So I just wonder what the...
So behavioural change challenges, absolutely gigantic to really engage employees. So Jordan, I'm
Go on then, I'll take the
you.
gigantic one. So I think this is actually the genuinely the hardest bit. I think if you take the experience of the last 2 years, that kind of golden window I was talking about earlier, showed that there were lots of people who just didn't know the answer. If there's a big issue in the world, they know something's going to happen. If you don't know the answer, sometimes you genuinely do just need a nudge. You need a push forward, and you need a sense of leadership. And the leadership element is going to be a big part of this, not just in terms of government, but definitely in terms of industry. And so some of the learnings from climate was that lots of people just didn't want to move, didn't feel like they had to move. It's too small for me, I can't make a difference. And yet sometimes the nudge has pushed them in the direction that we needed them to go. So for me, I think it's mainly about bravery. I think there are some things that are going to be slightly more contentious than other, and we don't want to track everyone's health data from every bit of thing they do every day. And frankly, where would you put that data? But it's going to take a bit of bravery, I think, from leaders to say, I take the health of my workforce seriously. I offer this as a result. We're not doing this anymore, and this is why. And if you want to work for an organisation who does that, please do stay. And if not, then the choice is yours. But I think it's about bravery, to be honest, from leaders.
Thank you, Jordan. Kieran and then Gavin.
I'd just jump in on that. Absolutely take the point. I also think that we need to think about the design of what's being provided as well. So, for example, we've done lots of practical work around the experience of shift workers. And a lot of employee support schemes are just really poorly designed for people who work at night time rather than daytime. Or often you'll find that employee assistance programs work really well for people who are well paid, but don't really extend to people who are least well paid as well. So I do totally take the point, but I think there's an important role for employers to think about what is it that they're designing, and actually is that part of the barrier to take up as well.
And you've done some fabulous work, I know, Kieran, on the Night Shift Workers Programme, which is absolutely fabulous and is one of our case studies, by the way.
Just a really sort of closing,
and then I'll have to wrap up.
A closing comment on this. I think I quite often get asked what the data gap is, and to your point, the data gap is leadership. So I'll just finish on that point, actually.
Well, it's a very, very good point to end on. I think to really chart through the waters ahead for bold system change, we're going to need a hell of a lot of bravery and courage. So in terms of next steps, obviously we want to work with everyone who's prepared to be on that journey, because it will take every single one of us. It's not just government, not just business, it's all of us as citizens. Come and speak to us. There's a lot of work that we're doing at Business for Health, and it's all about some of the points that we've been discussing today. And thank you so much for coming. And thank you to my wonderful panel. Thank you.